trust Him more.
Grace and peace to you, and welcome to the final Lenten meditation for this year. Holy Week can be considered the darkest week, but on the flip side, it happens to be the brightest and best, because in it we see how light overcomes darkness and how humanity is being restored back to God. I invite us to turn with expectant hearts towards the promise of new life. Christian faith rises or falls on one central claim: Jesus Christ is risen. Without the resurrection, the cross will be a tragic ending to the faithful life of Jesus Christ. But with the resurrection, the cross becomes victory, hope, and a new creation. And that God's saving work is not only about forgiveness, but about new life, restoration, and hope. So to understand why the resurrection matters so deeply, we must begin with the most basic and honest question people ask. Was the resurrection a real event or a symbolic story? Did something actually happen to Jesus' body, or is the resurrection simply a metaphor for hope? The gospel writer insists on physical details that show us that the resurrection is real. An empty tomb, folded grave clothes, shared meals, wounded hands. These are not written just as poetry alone. They are bearing witness. Luke tells us the reason Jesus eats with his disciples. John tells us that Thomas touched his wounds. And Matthew tells us the tomb is empty. The resurrection claims a truth that is more than symbolic. God acted decisively in history. So the resurrection is not the disciples' wishful thinking. It is God's act of new creation. If the resurrection truly happened, then it directly confronts one of humanity's deepest fears: death itself. What does the resurrection say about death? If Jesus rose from the dead, what does that say about God's power over death? The Bible answers this question boldly. Death is not the final word, as Paul declares in 1 Corinthians 15:54. Death has been swallowed up in victory. The resurrection does not deny death or minimize grief. Instead, it declares that death is temporary and defeated. Because Christ lives, we face mortality, sorrow, and fear with hope rather than despair. So resurrection faith does not remove grief, but it refuses to let grief define the future for us. Yet, the resurrection is not only about what happened after death. It reshapes how we live here and now. How does the resurrection change life today? If Jesus is alive, discipleship is not loyalty to memory. It is a living relationship with God. The resurrection means forgiveness leads to transformation, grace leads to restoration, and hope leads to action. Resurrection life speaks into broken relationships, injustice, and despair. It empowers us to forgive boldly, resist evil faithfully, and love courageously. Easter faith is not passive optimism. It is active hope grounded in God's victory. If resurrection life shapes us personally, it also forms us collectively as the people of God. Because living as resurrection people beyond Easter morning is what we're talking about. How do we live as resurrection people after Easter morning has passed? The reason Christ sent his followers back into ordinary life with extraordinary hope To practice resurrection is to choose love over fear, courage over resignation, and faithfulness over despair. The resurrection continues to shape the church's mission, calling us to embody new life in a wounded world. So, did Jesus really rise from the dead? The Bible answers with conviction, yes. And because he lives, everything changes. The resurrection tells us that God is what the future holds for us and how we have been called to live. Christ is risen, and the resurrection is not only something we celebrate, it is something we live out in our lives as Christ's disciples. The Lord bless and be with us, and may the Lord keep us as we continue to live together.
Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust him